So Stanzas written in Dejection in Naples is the next person Shelley poem I want to look at. And in some ways it's a lot like the cold earth slept below. And he's almost the opposite half of the same coin, I'd say. The theme that this poem is about is very, very similar actually. Shelley's is essentially focused on the idea, I think, that...
So the next Shelley poem I want to look at is Stanzas written in Dejection near Naples. And in many ways it's the opposite half, I think, of the same coin of the cold earth slept below, in the sense that Shelley is, again, looking at a natural setting, again looking at a classically romantic setting, but he finds himself very much at odds with the setting itself. I see it as the opposite half of the same coin, because whereas with the cold earth slept below, everything in that poem is about emptiness, you know, that the natural setting for him is clouded and coloured by how he's feeling. Stanzas written in Dejection is almost the opposite thing, where the whole setting is full of sunlight and happiness, and everyone else around him is soaking up that atmosphere, but he's unable to. So whereas the cold earth slept below, his own feelings almost infect everything else around him, his issue in this poem is that his own feelings don't really seem to make any impact on anybody else. And as you can see there, the way that I'd teach this would be to look at this poem and essentially just give you a bunch of ideas as to what is it that causes the dejection. I wouldn't in an essay go through one by one, these ideas, because you'd end up with the list-like idea. You'd end up with the three boxes that I've spoken about before in an essay. But I think it's worth forming maybe an argument around these ideas. What is it that's causing Shelley's dejection? Is it any, or is it all of these things? Obviously we've got the love and Harriet and the loss of his children as well. So Mary Shelley had multiple pregnancies, which went wrong for one reason or another. So you could argue that that's in there. There's also the death of Harriet, which seems to be playing on his mind. So there's these personal tragedies in his life, but then there's also the fact, remember, that Shelley is exiled. His political views are at odds with everybody else. His friendship with Byron is at odds with everybody else. There's the frustration that his political ideas can't be met. Shelley really is a pre-socialist or a pre-Marxist. He's an atheist in a world that almost isn't really ready for these things. We think of Wordsworth as revolutionary. Well, Wordsworth lived a long life and ultimately became part of that Victorian establishment. Really, Shelley really didn't. So there's that. There's the sense, I think, of Shelley being imperfect in contrast to the perfection of nature. Nature is brilliant. He feels at odds at that. Perhaps the lack of fame and appreciation, the imperfection of his own poetry, the fact that he perhaps is not going to be thought of in the same way as some of the other earlier romantics. That idea obsesses Keats as well, but I think it's there in Shelley. So, essentially in this poem, what we're looking at is, well, what is it that's causing that dejection? So, if I open the poem, here it is. So it's again, as with the cold earth slept below, the structure that Shelley uses is more fluid than someone, for example, like Byron. What we have here is relatively standardised stanzas. You have a clear rhyme scheme, but there's lots of kind of echoing within this poem. So it's A B A B, B C B C C. So there's multiple kind of moments of echoing, and I think that's sort of the mood that Shelley and indeed Keats create. It's not a rhyme scheme like Byron, where the whole thing is written a certain way, often iambic tetrameter, with that ABAB rhyme scheme. I think it creates a slightly more nostalgic, slightly more melancholic tone, in my opinion, to use that kind of rhyme scheme, where everything just sort of, is half remembered almost. Sometimes lines rhyme with other lines, and you've almost sort of forgotten the rhyme when that line sort of comes in. Notice the opening, almost the opposite of the cold earth slept below. The sun is warm, the sky is clear. It's a total opposite to the cold earth slept below. The warm and the cold, really. Obviously, the clear sky versus the black sky of the cold earth slept below. The waves are dancing fast and bright. Everything about this seems the opposite. Cold earth slept below, everything's empty and it's the breath of the wind. Blue isles and snowy mountains wear the purple noon's transparent might. Again, we've got the wonder and the awe of Gothic poetry. The islands, the mountains. But the fast, the bright, the warm, the clear, this is almost like lines written in early spring. We get the sense of man being at one with nature. This is a very idealised version of nature. The breath of the moist earth is light, again, compared to the cold earth slept below. It's cold breath. The earth is hard. It's separating him from Harriet. Around its unexpanded buds. Now, I think that's a really crucial line. Unexpanded buds, so these buds haven't quite opened yet. It's a symbol that is a classically romantic one. Wordsworth dwells on this all the time, the idea of being young and inexperienced and that being a better state. But there's also, you could perhaps argue, bearing in mind that he lost children, Harriet died very young, that unexpanded buds perhaps is this idea of unfulfilled potential, or perhaps the idea of a life cut short too soon. Like many a voice of one delight, the winds, the birds, the ocean floods, the city's voice itself is soft like solitude. And I really like that couplet there, because the first line is a flood, isn't it? The wind, the bird, the floods of the ocean, everything is at one. We get this really pantheistic idea of the world being connected. But notice, what does flood rhyme with? Solitude. So we get all of these, this barrage of romantic imagery, the flood of romantic imagery, and then the last line, soft like solitude, flips that on its head. That last line makes everything that melancholic, adds that kind of melancholic tone to everything that came before. The next part we get, that was an accidental drawing, I apologise. I see the deep untrampled floor with green and purple seaweed strown. I see the waves upon the shore, like light dissolved in star showers thrown. I sit upon the sands alone. So what do we get here? Okay, the deep's untrampled floor. Again, the idea of untainted innocence that Shelley sees. The green and purple seaweeds around it. Again, we could see that as an image of tainted innocence. I prefer to see that as more positive, actually, the greens, the purples, as strewn, the sort of the freedom of nature, the freedom of the natural world. I see the waves upon the shore. Notice where Shelley is here, and notice the position of the speaker. He's seeing it. He's disconnected from it. He's not part of it. He's observing it. Like light dissolved in star showers thrown, I sit upon the sands alone. And again, notice that rhyme scheme, strown and thrown, the carelessness of nature, rhyming with alone, Shelley being at odds with it. He's seeing these things, but that emphasises his own alone nature. Is that because of his children? Is that because of Harriet? Is that because, as a self-aware second-generation romantic, he's comparing himself to Wordsworth, to Coleridge, to perhaps even Blake? The lightning of the noontide ocean is flashing round me again. These things are flashing, but they are around him. We had the ocean early on, the floods. They're happening around him. He's not part of it. Arises from its measured motion. How sweet! Did any heart now share in my emotion? Again, notice that exclamation mark. It sets up something close to a caesura in the middle of that line. But again, the motion versus the emotion. The natural world around him that is all at one, all in this perfect motion. But then Shelley's emotion that sets him apart. This whole poem is doing that. Whereas the cold earth slept below is Shelley's view, tainting nature. This is Shelley's view, being at odds with the nature that carries on almost unheeding him. The natural world is almost like the readership, that just don't appreciate his poetry, that aren't putting him on that same level of talent as somebody like Wordsworth. Alas, I have nor hope, nor health, nor peace within, nor calm around. And, Shelley wasn't a particularly healthy guy, so he's looking at his own bodily ailment once again, setting himself up, his own bodily weakness, versus the beauty and the strength of the natural world. No peace within, no calm around. So he's surrounded by these things, and yet he's unable to get the calmness either within or from around it. Again, it's almost a direct reference to Wordsworth, who talks about the sober pleasure and the revival formed by nature. The natural world can revive you. Shelley's saying, no, it can't. The natural world is, I can't get that to be around me, really, because I'm not part of it. Nor that content surpassing wealth the sage in meditation found, and walked with inward glory crown. Nor fame, nor power, nor love, nor leisure, others I see whom these surround. Notice that list: fame, power, love, leisure. And I said, what's causing the dejection? Well, there's four reasons right off the bat, aren't there? All these things that I feel, things that he feels that he is without. He can't get the peace with it. Other people can get this inward glory that crowns everything, and yet he's unable to do it. The rest of the world is crowned, but he's not. Notice the others I see. So again, he's seeing, he's observing, he's separate. So he's seeing other people who've got these things. That makes him feel essentially powerless. Smiling, they live and call life pleasure. To me, that cup has been dealt in another measure. Notice again, the couplet is one of contrast. They versus me. They live and call life pleasure. To me, that cup has been dealt in another measure. Perhaps it's a deliberate reference to Byron and lines inscribed on a cup. Perhaps again another deliberately romantic image. We could argue so, but I think it's that wider idea again, isn't it? That Wordsworth drinks in nature; it revives him. Shelley is saying, no, I'm unable to do that. Again, you could also argue that the measure is a reference to the poetry itself. This very measured, melancholic tone. His measure, the measure of his poetry, sets him apart also from someone like Byron, someone from Blake. Yet now despair itself is mild. Even as the winds and waters are, I could lie down like a tired child and weep away the life of care. So the despair is mild, the despair is melancholy, the despair is dejection. It's not this, this extreme emotion that he's feeling. It's something much softer. It's a much more melancholy emotion, like the winds and the waters. Notice I could lie down like a tired child. There's almost a self-awareness here. He knows that he's being a bit petulant. He weeps away the life of care. There's this sense that he knows he's being a bit ridiculous. He knows he's being a bit petulant here. But that doesn't sort of end the dejection. And he carries on, which I have borne and yet must bear. And there's that real balance here, isn't there? Because on the one hand, he's being stoic. He's saying, yeah, I've got to bear this. I've got to carry on bearing this. On the other hand, there is an element of petulance there. He said, I'm not going to sit down like a child, but then, I've borne it, I must bear it some more. There is an element of that. Till death like sleep might steal on me, and I might feel in the warm air, my cheek grow cold and hear the sea breathe o'er my dying brain its last monotony. Notice the references to the cold earth slept below, and the death like sleep. But again, notice the warm air versus the cold cheek. Even in death, we get the sense that Shelley is at odds with this, with these surroundings. He hears the sea. Well, when he's alive, he's been seeing the sea. So even in death, it doesn't really feel like anything's changed. He's still at odds with the surroundings. At the end, breathe o'er my dying brain, its last monotony. Again, the sense that he's seeing his own brain, his own work, his own word as monotonous, and almost powerless. And something dull, something boring. There's an element here of self-awareness. I think he's talking about himself as a poet as much as about himself as a man. And then the poem ends, some might lament that I were cold, as I, when this sweet day is gone, which my lost heart too soon grown old, insults with this untimely moan. So, some might be sad that was cold and dead in the ground, but that would only be like saying, oh, that was a nice day, it's a shame that it's over. So again, that sort of transience of life that Shelley sees, the fact that he doesn't really matter. People lamenting would only be like lamenting the end of a day that was quite nice. They might lament, for I am one whom men love not, and yet regret. Really odd two lines there, where you got this caesura right in the middle of both of them, and then enjambment between those two lines. So I am one whom men love not, being that sort of central idea that runs on between the two lines. Again, the separation between them and him. They might lament, they might regret. I am one who doesn't have those things. And then at the end, unlike this day, which when the sun shall on its stainless glory set, will linger, though enjoyed, like joy in memory yet. And almost the saddest part of this poem then, Shelley says, well, even when this day is over, men will still at least remember it. They'll say, it was a nice day, we kind of remember it. But he won't be remembered at all. So we get at the end, this sense, and he's self-aware and he knows he's being petulant, but he ends by sort of saying, I won't even be remembered, at least this day will be remembered fondly. I won't be that. So in some ways, the feelings people have for me are even worse than these really mild feelings of, oh, that was a nice day, it's a shame that it's over. So it's a very odd one. It's a really wallowy poem. It's a really self-aware poem at the same time. He knows he's being over the top. He knows he's being ridiculous, and yet he doesn't seem to be able to quite help himself. As I say, whereas Cold Earth Slept Below, it's him colouring everything he sees with his own dejection, his own sadness. This one, the whole point is that his dejection is just him, and therefore it becomes unimportant, it becomes petulant, it becomes almost embarrassing to him, and yet the poem still does it the same. There's a real sort of tension and a real frustration that Shelley seems to have, not just with the world, but also actually with himself. Ultimately, could you perhaps argue that he's dejected at himself, at the way he's feeling, the way he's thinking?